All right, the next slide, please. Okay, so you can see on your screen here, this is a background of our last year's community grants program. So this is kind of by the numbers. You can see that our average grant size was 18,621 last year, and that has stayed pretty consistent over the years, that about around that $20,000 range. Now we purposefully don't have a specific cutoff for either the bottom or the top of the numbers. We've made grants as small as $875 and as large as $225,000. So it all depends on the projects, and we don't want to kind of artificially cut a project off at the knees because we put a cap on it. However, I do want to caution you to take a look at these numbers. As you can see, we've got 6 different categories that we award in. So it's arts and humanities, education, health, human services, sustainable communities, and youth and families. And half of our dollars, which this year is going to be about 1.5 million, so half of that will be going to education. So that's career pathways and complementary ed. And that's because that is our strategic focus area, and we're trying to kind of move the needle in that realm. So there, you've got more money to spend. That's also, along with health, the only areas where you can ask for multi-year funding. Everything else is just a 1-year grant. But then the rest of the funds, the other 50%, are split amongst the other focus areas. So you can kind of see here on the screen where what the number of grants that were awarded, the amount of money that was awarded, and the average grant size and the range. So these are all really great indicators of what our committees are comfortable awarding. This information is in the community grants report as well as the grant guidelines. So that can be found online. We leave those all over the grant reports all over the place. So you might find them, I don't know, at your hairdresser, we'll see. You can always access this information in the guidelines that you can get as far as how much money you should ask for. The folks you see on the screen here are our donors. So these are folks who've given directly to our discretionary grant making or community grants. And it's really their thoughtfulness and their foresight that has allowed this program to grow and thrive the way it has. I particularly like to shout out the Rubin family. Their gift back in 2012 actually doubled our capacity. And that's why we have the strategic focus in education and health, because those were the areas that they indicated where they were particularly passionate about. And then we have 3 funds that we call named funds, and these are really field of interest funds. So they were set up by the donors to fund a type of grant, not necessarily a specific organization, just a specific purpose. So the first is the United Cerebral Palsy of Black Hawk Region, and that's awarded through our human services category. And it's specifically for services for persons with developmental disabilities, and especially activities that promote inclusion. That piece is very important. We're looking for activities that promote inclusion. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the organization that serves the folks with developmental disabilities needs to run the program. It could be the Boy Scouts or the Park District or anything like that, anything that promotes inclusion. The second is the Lundian Historical Preservation Fund, and that's through Sustainable Communities. Those are projects and programs that celebrate the region's history and preserve the historical integrity. And then the Margaret K. Aldine Christian Ministry Fund, which also awards through Human Services. And these are provides for housing and medical needs of the poor, primarily through organizations with a Christian emphasis. So the key with all of these is that you don't need to do a different application. You don't have to indicate that you want to apply for these. You're just applying to Human Services or to Sustainable Communities, and then we kind of work it out on the back end. But we want to make sure that you are aware that these programs exist, because if we don't get programs that meet the criteria of these funds, we will not award these funds. So like if you don't give us a program that promotes inclusion, that money just will go back to the principal and grow for next year. So we just want to make sure that everyone is aware of that. So All right. And now I'm going to hand it off to Ariel Thompson, our In Youth We Trust staff liaison.
Hello, everyone. As many of you know, may have heard of Youth We Trust, but anyone who's new, Youth We Trust is the Community Foundation's Youth Philanthropy Program for high school students in our 4 county areas. This program focuses on grant making, volunteerism, and leadership skills that equip students to enact positive change for the future. The grant process mirrors our community grant process. They have up to $20,000 every year to award to local youth-led organizations for their community projects. Youth-led meaning that the youth apply, write, execute, and plan the grant themselves. This application will open from October 3rd to November 7th. You may have noticed these dates are in the fall because, this past year, the students did a survey with their community and they found that students really wanted the need for youth mental health related services and support. If you have any youth volunteers that work with your organization, that could be a great way to engage them in a specific project related to youth mental health as helped guide them through the process of grant making. What an amazing way to share these experiences knowledge about grant making for the next generation. If you know any youth-led projects that would like to contribute to youth mental health in our community that could benefit from this resource, please contact them and let them know they can reach us at our website or CFNIL.org or email me at youth3trust.org at CFNIL.org. And then in conjunction with our grant cycle for youth-led projects, the Council for the 3rd year is offering a grant cycle specifically for nonprofits that serve youth directly and can be granted by adults. So we also want these programs to be youth mental health related as well. So the applications for the nonprofits will open in February 20th through March 20th. And the total amount awarded can be between $15,000 to $20,000. Once we get closer to these dates, the grant line guidelines will be broadcasted. So again, the student youth-led ones will be this fall from October 3rd to November 7th, and then adults will be in the spring from February 20th to March 20th. The application process to become a Youth We Trust member is very simple. It's online at the website, again, at CFNIL.org, and then the applications will be due at our first meeting, will be a week after our first meeting, September 10th at 10 a.m. So again, if you're interested, any students have in mind, please recommend them our way. We are heavily recruiting for this year. Pass it over to James.
So yes, I'm James Patterson, Program Director for the Community Foundation. So I oversee most of our grant making programs that we have. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll talk about the largest grant program that we have, the Community Grants Program. And the first thing I really want to let you know is that there are a lot of resources that are on our website that have to do with the Community Grants Program. Your first stop would be to look at the guidelines on the Community Grants webpage. It'll give you all the specifics, deadline dates, the timeline. It'll talk about what we fund and what we don't fund. All of those things are on there, the specifics. There's also a couple of other pages that can be very helpful to you. One is our grant resources page, which is for grant seekers, such as yourselves. And there's another one for our current grantees who already have a grant with us that has a lot of really good information in it. We'll go to the next slide and take a look at some of the things that are on those sites. So we have portal tutorials, both video and written ones that will help you understand how to use the portal better. There's a grants FAQ for a lot of the questions that just get routinely asked, and they have answers. We've posted a sample budget spreadsheet and narrative on there because that is part of our application to have that budget. And we sort of have our way that we like to see it. And so we give you an example so you have some sense of what we're looking for. There's also a document called Working with PDFs. Sometimes PDFs give people trouble. And most of the time when there's an issue with someone attaching a document, on the application, it's usually because it's not a PDF document or it's too large. And this working with PDFs document will help you know how to reduce the size and how to create a PDF to begin with. We also have examples of our evaluation plans and result statements. And we do that, again, because we sort of have a certain way that we like to see that information and so that it's comparable across applications and consistent for the committee members that are reading. So there's several examples on there that will help you, like there's an example of an event, there's an example of a program, there's an example of a project, and so on. So also the grant report is a great source for you for a number of different reasons. For one thing, there's explanation about the focus areas, but then it lists all the grants that were made last year in that focus area, giving you a really good idea of the types of things we like to fund, and also some of the amounts of the grants that we're funding. And there is a Word version of the application that can be very helpful to you if you want to work offline, and if you want to be able to, type it up in Word, which you're so accustomed to and use, and then paste it into the actual online application. And if there's some sort of hiccup in the internet, you don't have to worry about losing your data. And sometimes it's easier to brainstorm with a group if you have like a paper document that you're looking at. So it can be useful as well. These proposal review guidelines, I think, are super important. They are literally the points and sections that our committee members are looking at as they're scoring your application. So it really gives you insight into the whole evaluation process and what they use to make selections. We'll go to the next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about eligibility. So your organization needs to be a 501c3 nonprofit, a religious organization, or a unit of government, or a public educational institution. You need to be serving folks. And by the way, you need to be that for at least a year. You need to be serving folks that are in our service area of Boone, Ogle, Stevenson, and Winnebago counties. And we won't fund religious purposes, although we fund many faith-based organizations all the time for non-religious purposes. We can go to the next slide. It's also really important to be current on your reporting with the Community Foundation. The committees are not going to want to fund a new project if you're not current on your reporting. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have your final report in. If your project is not done, we'll ask you to submit what we call an interim report. And that's a pretty simple document, less than a page, and essentially just gives a quick status update and then the reason why the project has not finished or the final report is not in. And a lot of times that's simply because we're just not done with the program yet. And that's fine. So, but however, if you have completed your program and you have not turned in your final report, that's what you should do, is really complete the final report instead of the interim report. And if you don't recall, or you need some help understanding whether or not you are current on your reporting, you should get in touch with Lisa DeLange. You can see her email address right there, but it's also plastered all over our website. So if you need to find it, you can do that. We'll go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about the timeline. So we opened the application just past Monday. So it is open and ready to go. You will need to register on the portal to be able to access that, unless of course you're already registered. That would still hold up. And then the submission deadline is going to be September 12th by 5 o'clock in the evening there. And then there's sort of like a 2.5 month sort of time period there where we go through a review process that I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But then we'll make the awards in late December. We like to say that we're going to get them to you before the holiday season. And then your funding period goes essentially from then until March of the following year. So about 14 months or so to give you time to do that. Now, if you're done before that, you certainly can turn in your report early. And the exception to that funding period is if you receive a multi-year grant through the health or education areas. We'll go to the next slide. It is a very competitive process. Routinely, well, you can see my numbers there. I don't know how I got my numbers not the same as Sarah's. Sarah's are probably more accurate. So doesn't matter though. It gives you the idea that we can fund about half of what comes in, and sometimes it's only a third of what comes in. So it's always very, very competitive. So you might wonder, how do we make these decisions if there's that many? Well, first, let me start by saying that there's an awful lot of great projects that end up on the cutting room floor, so to speak. And that's a shame, but it is the truth. But so the process that we use is very thorough. The committees, well, let me step back and say that staff first reviews the applications, and we're only looking to see if they're eligible and if they are complete. If they're eligible and complete, they'll move on to committee. If not, then we'll screen them out there. Then the next step in the process is our committee reviewers. We have 8 committees, and they work within those focus areas we talked about. And we have 2 committees for education and 2 committees for human services. Otherwise, each committee is over one of those focus areas. They get those applications and they have 2 weeks to review them on their own. And they score them using that proposal evaluation form that I mentioned. So again, that's a really good resource to know what they are looking at. You might score yourself on your application and see where you come out. But so that's a good document for that. They review and then they get together and we have a meeting, and then there's discussion about which ones should be recommended to the board. So they'll make a decision on that at that time, and those will go to our board who reviews them for approval. So we'll go to the next slide. We really strive to be fair and objective in the whole process. And part of the way we do that is we involve our community in that selection process. So each of those committees may have 2 or 3 community foundation trustees on the committee, but then the rest of the folks are going to be committee members or community members, that you may know, or that they know the organizations that are in our community. So we get that community involvement aspect to it. We also have a very robust conflict of interest policy. So if there is a committee person who sits on the board or is deeply involved in one of the organizations that they have an application to review, they will declare that they had that conflict, and then they will recuse themselves from any conversation about it, and then also will abstain from voting. We also keep the names and identity of our committee members confidential, and that's so that there can't be any lobbying. It shouldn't be that if you happen to know a committee member that you get a leg up over someone who doesn't. And so that's a little piece that we try to do there too. The other thing we try to do is make sure that the advice and information that we provide to our applicants is the same across the board. Everybody gets the same thing. I would answer a question for one that I wouldn't answer for another. We'll go to the next slide. And we'll start talking a little bit about the technical pieces here of actually applying. And the first step is going to be to register if you have not already. Many of you already have an account, and that's great. But we'll point out here that the email address part there is case sensitive. So it's actually acting as a username rather. Well, it does act as an email address, but it's acting as a username in this particular case. So if you type a capital J at the beginning when you sign up, then it's going to want that capital J every time. Then as far as creating a new account, if you have not created an account, you want to do that, and you want to do it as soon as possible. That way we can make sure that if there are any issues with registration, you're able to get those worked out well before the deadline comes up. And then a little note about the organizational. I always tell people that I love this software program. I love the application. It works really well, but nothing is flawless, right? Well, this is the part that's not flawless with this particular program, is in the way that it handles user accounts. This is my opinion, but the way that it handles user accounts, you don't have the ability to, well, if you already have an organizational account, if you register, then you're going to create a duplicate account. So it's important to if you do have an organizational account, to make sure that you either use the collaborator tool, and I'll talk about that in a minute, or you call Lisa here at the Community Foundation and have her set you up with an account. That way you'll be connected to that organizational account. So we'll go to the next slide. And here again, you also don't have the ability, once you've registered, to change your organizational information. So it's really important to get that correct when you do it the first time. But if it does need to be changed, then you would just contact Lisa and she can make those edits for you. We'll go to the next slide. So here's my little check sheet to make sure I've told you everything that I'm supposed to tell you. And it looks like I have, so we'll go on to the next slide. So this is, once you are in your portal account, this is what you'll see, your applicant dashboard. And you'll see at the top there, there's an apply link up there. If you click that, that will take you to the Apply Now page where the applications that are currently available will be listed. And if you look down below here, we have two tabs. The active tab is where your applications that you currently have in progress, either they're draft applications or they are funded applications that haven't been, you haven't done your final report yet for, or the historical tab where you can see, your personal requests that you put in as the user. We'll go to the next slide. And if you look at the top, you see the organization history. If you click there, you can see all of the requests that the organization has submitted. So when we talked on the last slide, we had that historical tab. That's for you as a user. And then this organizational history is for the entire organization. You would see the history that's there. So looking in the middle of the screen here, we've got some colorful blue links there, and I circle those because those are tutorials on various things. One for generally applying for funding. You have one for using the collaborator, and then for two different purposes that can be really helpful. So the collaborator, by the way, is nice if you have a situation where you're working on an application and you have others in your organization that you want to be able to assist in some ways. And you can set up permission on that in terms of whether they can edit, view, submit. It might be such a thing that you want the finance person to be able to complete the budget and upload that for you. It might be that you want the executive director to be able to read it, but not make any changes, but just so that they know what you're applying for. So you use the collaborator tool to do that. And as I mentioned before, you can also use the collaborator tool to add users to your organization. So having those tutorials are helpful to be able to learn how to do that. So I'm looking at the lower left-hand corner, which is the preview button, which will allow you to look at the application just like it looks like when it's open, and you're able to actually input information so that you can see the fields that will populate. We have there's many fields that only populate for certain support type, or maybe if it's an art grant, or those kinds of things. We try to make the application tailored to your specific situation by hiding certain fields. So this preview, you can put in that information. You can find out which fields are going to show for you. But the caution here is with the preview is that it will not save any of that information. So it really isn't the application. And so you don't want to put much data in there. Then another important point is that this particular application auto-saves. Now, why every form on the internet doesn't auto-save, I have no idea. I think Google invented that or something, but now it's working for this particular application, which is wonderful. And we have the apply button. You can guess probably that if you click on that, it will take you to the Apply Now page, which I think is what we're going to look at next slide. Oh, no, we got to do the check sheet here. I think we're good. But this is the apply page. Or no, actually, I take that back. This is not the apply page. This is actually the application. It's the beginning of an application. A couple of things to point out here. The first one I'll mention is the red circle around the copy previous answers button that's blue there toward the top. This can really be a time saver for you. If you've applied to us before, you can click that and select one of your past applications to import the answers into the new application. So, your organizational information may not and probably doesn't change from year to year on a regular basis. So some of that information can be already in your new application without you having to re-input it. You do have the ability, by the way, to edit it though. So if you did have you wanted to freshen it up, you certainly can do that. And it can really be useful if you're applying for the same program that you have applied for in the past, because a lot of that information may be the same. So really useful feature that they added. And then we talked about the collaborate button. That's where you go to do that. And then if you look in the middle, the big circle is just pointing out the idea that you don't have to re-enter your user information and your organizational information, the basic organizational information, every time you do an application. That's going to come from your account in this application, which is pretty handy. And then if you look at the circled question list button, that one will produce a PDF of all of the questions on the application. That's irrespective of whether you've chosen, a project, event, a program, whatever. All of the fields, including the ones that might be hidden to you if you selected a different support type. So we'll go to the next slide here. And I want to talk a little bit about that we are accepting photos through Dropbox now. Now, the nice thing about this is that used to be you would have to upload in specific upload fields. So we only had 4 or 5 of them. But in this case, you can actually add up to 10 in the Dropbox, and it doesn't weigh down the application, memory-wise. So, but we do have some conventions here that we'd like you to follow when you do this. There's a naming convention, as you can see. We want you to follow that so that it's consistent and our reviewers will know what they're looking at. You can see the blue link there. That's how you do access the Dropbox. When you click that, it'll bring up what they call a file request, and you literally just drag and drop your photos over there. Oh, and I should also mention that you'll want to name the files on your computer prior to dragging and dropping, because you can't change anything once it's in there. So let's see. Oh, and another important thing is that sometimes you have pictures that you don't want us to use for any purposes. I mean, Jennifer, our communications engagement director, she is great at using these wonderful pictures you give us to promote your work and promote the grant making that's going on. But if you have photos that you do not want to be used for confidentiality reasons, just put do not use in there. It looks like we have a question about the Dropbox. So
Yep.
How about figures? Do we need to upload figures onto Dropbox as well? By figures, what do you mean by figures? Oh, like flowcharts. Yeah, you could. Certainly, if that's something that's going to support your proposal, yeah, you could do that for sure. Good question. All right, we'll go to the next slide. And here is an example of what that Dropbox looks like after you drop those files in there. You can see one has a do not use on it, but it uses that naming convention. And so we'll go to the next slide. Yep, I think we covered all of that. We'll move on. So we tried to support the Fix the Form movement. And 2 of the things specifically that we've done is to try to make sure their application form is always shared ahead of time. And really, it's been shared ahead of time for the last 15 years, and it hasn't changed, tremendously during that time. But you can always find it on our website and see what those questions will be. The other thing we've done is increase the character limits. So you'll see some that you can put in as much as 10,000 characters. Now, when I say it's going to allow you to do 10,000 characters. I'm not saying that's the goal. I'm not saying that's the target you want. What we're doing is we're just trying to make sure that you don't have to do so much wordsmithing that it takes you extra time to do it. So it's still good to be concise, right? But if you may have written this program description to some other funder, and we don't want you to have to, if you're going to copy and paste that into our application, we don't want you to have to wordsmith it down to where it fits our character limits. So the character limits are much larger now, but that doesn't mean we're asking you to put more words there. Another nice little feature that we have is the rich text editor. So you can use bullets now, you can use bolding, you can underline, things like that to sort of bring out different aspects of your proposal. So we'll move on to the next slide here. And we have a commercial break. I believe this is Sarah.
It is. I'm going to see what happens when I turn on my video. Still good?
So far.
Okay. Yeah, so to give James a chance to get a drink, I'm going to talk about a way that you can get involved with the foundation if you would like to. So in addition to our community grants program, we also award about $370,000 a year in scholarships to local students. And those students do include a lot of undergrad or graduating high school seniors, but it also includes adult learners, folks returning to school, even vocational programs, things like that. So we this year we gave around 176 students scholarships. So it's a really great opportunity, but in order to do that, we need a veritable army of volunteers to review applications for us. Our goal is 144. We haven't gotten there quite yet, but we will one day we're going to get there. Because last year or 2 years ago, we had 1,313 applications received. So that takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And so we asked the community to help us with that. It's actually a very time-bound project. So you do a training and then you review the applications online on your own time over a period of about 10 days. And then you come in into the office for one person or for one meeting to make the actual selection with a team of other volunteers. So it's kind of an intense 2 weeks, but that's it. You're done. You come back next year. And you get to see all of the awesome things that our community does, like all the amazing stuff that our students are doing and the things that they're going to do. It's just really inspirational. And we have one volunteer who every single year leaves the room and says, my faith in humanity has been restored. So, so we encourage you to join us. If you are interested, please let us know. And by us, I really mean Lisa. And we have a recruitment meeting coming up on September 8th at the foundation, where you can come and just learn a bit more about what it looks like to be a volunteer with us and our different programs and things. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We hope that you get to know more. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll take a look at some application tips. So it's important to begin the application in the user account, who will be the primary contact. And that's because the application will forever be associated with that user and only secondarily associated with the organization. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier about the organizational accounts and all of that. So if you're new to the organization, but you're going to be the primary contact on this particular one, or if you've never completed an application with a private, your individual user, if you haven't registered as an individual user, let's say that, then you'll want to do that prior to starting an application. And you can do that. I mean, probably the easiest thing to do is call Lisa and she will set you up in that. So that's an important point. And of course, all the applications must be submitted online. We don't take any paper applications. I do oftentimes get asked about applying for currently funded programs. Will we do that? And I say, yes, we will do that. We realize that sometimes, and actually many times, the currently funded program is not complete yet before it's time to request money to be able to do the program in the following year. So that's common, But what I do suggest to you, and what really would work in your favor, is because remember, you're going to have to do an interim report because you do have something that's currently being funded that their final report is not in for. But before I told you that the interim report was very short and sweet, less than a page. However, if you're asking for funding for something you're currently doing, you probably want to be a little more detailed. You'll want to tell them about the results that you're getting, how it's working, the successes that you're having, because they'll want to know that. If they're gonna fund it again, they'll want to know that that's occurring. And and actually, there's been a lot of times where that information, that update on the previous program, sells it more than the application itself. So it is an important thing to keep in mind. I get a lot of questions too about choosing a focus area, and Sarah alluded to this as well, or will allude to it. But in any case, it's an important point. I get a lot of questions of which focus area that a person should apply to. But the real key here is that there's a lot of permeability between our focus areas, a lot of crossover. So there's a lot of crossover between arts and education, for an example, or arts and sustainable communities, for an example, or youth and families and human services. And they sort of, they touch on many different aspects and areas, and that's fine. And we know that that's the case. They were not designed to be silos. All these things work together. But the biggest takeaway for you is just choose the focus area you think is the best fit from your perspective. We interpret our focus areas in the way that we interpret them. And you may look at the word human services and that means something a little different to you. And that's fine. So go ahead and just choose the one that makes the most sense to you. And then what we will do is, if we think that a different committee or a different focus area would be a better fit, and that committee might understand that proposal, might resonate more with that committee, then we'll move it. We'll move it over for you. So it should be worry-free picking your focus area. Just choose the one that you think fits the best. And then attachment specifications is another important thing for you to keep in mind with the application. I think I said a little bit ago that when it comes to the attachments, the two biggest problems when I get questions, and I get a fair amount of questions about attachments, it's usually either it's not a PDF or it's too large of a file. So remember that document I talked about before, working with PDFs, that can help you with that. We'll go on to the next slide. So I have some more tips here. You can have, your organization can have up to 3 requests in any given grant cycle. And as far as this, and they have to be unique, by the way, so you wouldn't apply with the same proposal to 2 different focus committees. Sort of, trying to hedge your bet there. Maybe one would like it better than the other. So you do have to sort of pick where you want to send that proposal. But they need to be unique. It can be up to 3. And we have funded in a past organizations with 3 proposals. So it does happen, and as far as this rule goes, we count an organization's foundation, if it's a separate entity, as the same thing as the organization. So they're sort of combined. And I know legally it can be 2 separate organizations, entities. But for us, if the foundation is only there to support the organization itself, it's the same to us with this rule. And then there is also, at the beginning, for your convenience, the ability to upload your interim report right on the application. And that'll be like right at the beginning. We'll go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the support types. For many years, we've had 3 support types: program and project, and then event, which are pretty commonly understood. But we created a 4th one to allow us to create an application that has questions that are more relevant to this type of a request. So it's not as commonly known. So we have what we call the capital commodity, and the capital part's a little easier to understand. We're talking about, maybe equipment purchases and maybe a remodeling project, things you think of as capital. But when we talk about capital, we are not talking about what you call a capital campaign, which is like a larger capital initiative. Say you're looking for $1 million to build a building or something like that. We're not going to give $5,000 to $1 million project. Having said that, if there's like a certain portion of it that we could cover the vast majority of, then we might be interested in looking at that. So it could be a portion of a larger project for a specific piece within it. But we've done a lot of vans. We've done a lot of remodeling of bathrooms to make them ADA compliant, which is an important thing. We'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about the commodity support type. Actually, it's one support type, capital and commodity we've combined. But the other side of it is the commodity thing, which might be not as obvious what it is. But what we're talking about is the purchase of consumable items that you're then more or less going to distribute. There's really no program wrapped around it. The impact is literally the person getting that item. So we're talking about bulk food, maybe backpacks for kids for school, giving away clothing, things like that. There's not a program around it. It's just actually distributing items that are very helpful to people. And I should say, to clarify a little bit more, it's not for something like, supplies for an actual program. So if you have a program and it needs supplies and those are consumable, right? Kind of some similarities there, but there's a program wrapped around it. It's different in that way. And so you can see the example of the art supplies for a painting class. Well, the goals of the program is to teach people to paint and teach them to enjoy painting and so on. It's not about the supplies itself. That's a means to an end. Whereas with the distribution of food, that is the end. The end is to get the food to people. So we'll move on to the next slide. And we'll talk a little bit about the budget. Sometimes the budget's tricky. And of course, we do have our form that we like to see it in. And that's mostly so that it's easy for our reviewers to be able to review and compare and so on. So a really important thing, and it'll lessen your frustrations, you can only type into the blue cells. If you try to type into the white cells, you're not going to have any luck. And then you're going to call me and you're going to be mad. So please, just use the blue cells. That's the only place you need to do that. And you can see where it has the little division thing there. It will total it up for you. You don't have to worry about even doing that. And then you should always make sure that your revenue either equals or exceeds your expenses. And I say it can exceed it because you may have some funds that you don't know for sure that you're going to get. You may have just applied for them, or you may be estimating like earned income or something, and you don't know for sure exactly what you're going to get. So, but as long as we can see that there's a plan for trying to find those dollars to fully fund, that's what we're looking for. So we'll go to the next slide. And here again, there's that PDF thing again. So this does have to be converted to a PDF, because when you download it from our website, it's going to be an Excel doc so that you can type right into it for your convenience. You'll create a PDF and then you'll upload the PDF. So that's important to know. And as you can see, if you look, we've given you 10 lines for expenses. That's not a ton whenever you have a larger program. So in many cases, you're going to have to combine items into line items. So maybe you have one that you're combining into marketing items. Maybe you have one you're combining supplies. Maybe you have one you're combining some salary. Whatever it is, try to group them by like items as much as possible, and then make sure to share or explain that in your budget narrative that accompanies the budget sheet itself. We'll go to the next slide and see if we've covered everything here. And it appears that we have. Next slide, please. So there are certain situations where 2 quotes are required to be uploaded, and that's whenever one line item exceeds 5,000. So we're talking about, anytime that line item is over 5,000, we're talking about remodeling projects, even though remodeling projects, they may have components that don't add up to 5,000 individually, but usually you've gotten a quote for the whole thing from a contractor, and that may be over 5,000. So we would want 2 quotes in those situations. If you have a consultant that's going to cost more than 5,000, if you have a facility rental that's going to cost more than 5,000, equipment purchase, so on, anything like that that's over 5,000, and even if it's a large quantity of the same item that's over 5,000. So like, if you got 50 Chromebooks, it's probably going to be over $5,000. So we wouldn't want to see a quote on the individual Chromebooks, so we could see 2 quotes on it, so we could see that you had done your, you chopped around. But there are exceptions to every rule, right? So you can see my little exceptions down here. There's situations where obtaining 2 quotes would just not be practical. Perhaps there's only one real vendor for that particular item that you need. And if that's the case, explain that to us in the budget narrative. There might also be a situation where, you get a really good deep discount from a particular vendor, and it would be sort of silly to go out and get another quote that's going to be ridiculously high, and that individual is not going to get the job anyway. You wouldn't want them to have to do that for no reason. When you're definitely going to give it to your partner organization that's been, cutting you this break. And if that's the case, then just get a letter from them indicating that, yes, normally these services would cost this amount, but we do this at a discounted rate for this organization because we're supporting this organization. We'll go to the next slide. So yes, that is what we're doing. And we're going to go to the next slide and talk about indirect expenses. So we recognize that you can't do programming if you can't keep your doors open. So you have to have the lights on, and you have to have heat. And you have to have leadership that's not directly involved in running the program itself, perhaps. So we will fund up to 15%. Well, we'd like to fund 15%. We want you to charge us 15% for your programs of indirect. And we don't want you to spell out necessarily what it is, whether it's utilities or whatever. That doesn't matter. Just say indirect expense on the budget form, and that's our contribution to your overhead. We'll go to the next slide and take a look at some examples of what I mean here. And what's really important, it's not so much what's indirect, it's more important about what is direct. So like with the example of rent, the portion of your building that is being used, or a rental facility for that matter, that is being used for the program itself, that is a direct expense. That's not indirect. Now, the administrative office, well, that's indirect. So you wouldn't count that as direct expense. Salary, the folks that are actually working on the program, that's a direct expense. Now, the executive director, if they are not directly involved, because sometimes an executive director actually is directly involved, but if they are not, then that would be indirect. So you can see the other examples there, and you can look at this PowerPoint later too. But we'll go to the next slide and look at how to determine this 15%. So this is our little formula. So we say, determine all of your direct expenses, list those, and then total them up, multiply that by 0.15, add a line item to your budget and any expenses for that 15%, and then adjust your request amount to cover all those expenses. We believe that we should be covering our fair share of your indirect costs. So on to the next slide, which is where I say, Sarah, come on back.
All righty. So we have a couple other things coming up to support the community grants process. The first one is our results and budgeting workshops. So these are opportunities for you to actually come into the office and work with James directly on the 2 trickiest parts of our application, which are the results section and the budget. We have some pretty specific ideas about what we want to see in those applications or in those sections, so we should tell you what that is. It's also a great opportunity, like once you've gotten into the application, and starting to have questions to come in and work with us. So you can sign up right here by scanning the QR code. You can also find links on our website. But we do request that you RSVP beforehand, as space is limited. So, and these are all in person. There will be no Zoom options because we did that once and it was terrible. So not going to do that one again. So we also have another workshop. This one's a little bit different. Alignment Rockford, the organization that's working to support the public school system, is doing the second round of the early development instrument. So that's the EDI is a data set that actually has every kindergarten teacher rate every kindergartner in the area on various factors, and then they that can actually be mapped by neighborhood. So then you can see what neighborhoods have what deficiencies or where they need extra assistance, things like that. So it's a really cool local data set. And that's kind of a rare thing to have, something that's detailed. So we are partnering with Alignment as well as with R1 to put on a workshop to learn how to use this data. So what is this data set? How do you get to it? How do you apply it? And then how do you use that to create an effective grant application? So James will be presenting that. That'll be on August 18th from 4 to 5 p.m. at the Discovery Center. We are asking for RSVPs for that one as well. There'll be a form on the website, and or you can just contact me. That one will also actually have a walkthrough an hour earlier where you can come into the Discovery Center to look at all the maps, because it's create maps with all the data so you can kind of see how things shake out. So you'll be able to come in anytime in that 2-hour period and look at the map, see what's happening in your neighborhood, and talk to the folks who helped us put it together. Okay, and then there will be our grantee orientation. We've been doing this for the last couple of years, and it's where we bring all of our grantees together to just explain kind of our expectations. So you've got the money, now what? We talk about reporting requirements, how to publicize it, what to do if you need an amendment, things like that. It'll happen sometime during the week of January 9th. So you'll find out whether or not you got the funds by the end of the year, and then we'll request that you come to one of these events that week. It's not required for folks who are regular grantees of ours, like what to do. But if you haven't attended in the last 2 years, we do ask that you do attend.
And you're also welcome to come if you have come and you just want a refresher.
Absolutely. So, any questions?
We to get started, you can answer the pre-submitted questions.
We can. So these are questions that were submitted with the beforehand when you RSVP'd. So the first one is, do you require audited financials? For a small nonprofit that conducts in-house audits, can you recommend a local auditor who could help us? We are not really in a position to recommend an auditor, though someone this morning in our earlier session recommended the Lucas Group as one that might be good. But James, you want to talk about the requirements of the financials?
Yeah, so the audited financials, we do require those if you're applying for a multi-year grant or a grant over 50,000. Otherwise, we ask for the 990s.
So short answer, no. The second one is, do you provide more details about what you fund, or can you provide more details about what you fund related to capital grants and how to categorize capital projects? James, you went into pretty significant detail on that earlier.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Not really. I mean, the big distinction has to do with we don't want to fund a small portion of a large campaign, but we do understand that there are needs for capital items like equipment and so on. So, yep.
Absolutely. Okay, and what if your program overlaps with 2 or more focus areas? Like we said, this can easily happen, and the focus areas are really more than anything an organizational tool for us to, like, we've got to manage all of this information. How do we do it? We do it by a focus area. So choose the one that you think is best. If you think that, or if you are agonizing over it, don't give us a call. We will move it if we think that it'll be more successful in a different area. The only one that really matters ahead of time is the multi-year and the higher dollar ones. Those need to, you need to be in education or health for those. So. All right, any other questions? Okay, well then, we have just a couple more things to mention. We have more events. We got really event happy this year because after not being together for 2 years, we're like, ooh, let's all be together all the time. So I want to mention this upcoming community resource inventory. So One Body Collaboratives runs a program called Bridges Out of Poverty, and it's to help people become financially stable. And they've realized as they've been running this program that they really need a program that's more about staying out of poverty and building those kinds of tools and resources for individuals. So they started looking into it and realized that a lot of these resources are already out there. People are already providing these services. So we just need to figure out how to get them all together, wrap them around, create some sort of way for everyone to find this information easily. It's something that's been attempted and done in various capacities at various times, but we're hoping that this will be a way that we can kind of create one definitive list that lots of people can access. So we are co-hosting the event with the City of Rockford's Health and Human Services Department as well. So that one, you can find information at the One Body website and the ability to RSVP as well. And then finally, and most importantly, is our nonprofit happy hour. So this is an experiment that we've done this year. This is something we've never done before, but we really wanted to give people an opportunity to just get together and get to know each other again. We've been alone a lot and working in our own silos. So we're trying to break down those silos a little bit. Plus, we have a beautiful backyard with a view of the river, and it's a shame that we don't use that more often. So come out to the foundation. Come anytime between 3 and 6 on August 25th. That's a Thursday. You can stay for a little while. You can stay for a long while. You can bring friends, bring coworkers, whoever you'd like. And just let's play games. We'll have bags and badminton and all sorts of things like that. There will be drinks. There will be snacks. There may be karaoke if people are feeling really exciting. But we've done this twice. Already. We did it in June and July. And I kind of get the sense that people don't believe us, that this is like, this is what we're doing. No, we are throwing a yard party with beer in the backyard. So please come and join us. We're hoping that the August event will be a real rager. So. And with that, we really appreciate all of your time today. Yes,
Robot Sarah has returned, unfortunately. Just for the end.
Oh no. But I think that was it, right?
Yep.
That was pretty much it. We have contact information here on the slides.
I realized I forgot to put in Lisa's contact information. So Lisa is I'm putting it in the chat right now.
Yes, definitely. She's a great resource. You'll all love working with her.
And my number and email are all over the application and our website. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you need help.
All right, cool. We will hang out for just a couple more minutes if you have a burning question, but otherwise we hope you enjoy your day. Have a fantastic weekend.